he's been a monster. He's been causing all kind of ruckus for defenses.
14 weeks in, and it's time to start thinking about awards season. I'm not sure if you've seen, but the Pro Bowl voting opened over the weekend. 6 players per position is what you're asked to vote for. And unless you plan to just spam your ballot with players from your favorite team, no judgment here, kind of judgment here. We thought we might be able to help you figure out who is deserving. Welcome to the SumerSports Show with Sam Bruchhaus. I'm Lindsay Rhodes.
Hey, Lindsay, the Pro Bowl is in an interesting place. There's flag football going on. There's a skills competition. There's no football being played, but at least it gives us the opportunity to take a look at the 6 best players at each position.
Yeah, 6. So what's interesting about this is that if you go to NFL.com and you click on the Pro Bowl voting and you go about actually attempting to vote for your favorites, you're going to notice that they're not broken up into AFC and NFC. So you are supposed to, I reached out to the NFL, you're supposed to, from a fan standpoint, just vote for the 6 favorite players at each position. You are not supposed to take into consideration AFC or NFC or any kind of split. That will supposedly be taken care of with the player voting and the coaching voting. And then obviously, the top 3 in each conference will actually go. For purposes of this conversation, I'm going to point out kind of who the top 3 in each conference are, and we'll tell you who the top 6 scorers are. So if you just want to vote that way, then you can feel free to do that. Let's start with the quarterback position, where I think that the names, let's see how I want to phrase this. I think the names that make the Pro Bowl probably will not be different from in years past, but they probably should be.
Definitely. And I will caveat here that for most of the quarterbacks, and in particular the quarterbacks that we are used to performing extremely highly, this is kind of a down year from the quarterback position. I wouldn't say we're quite at the standpoint where we were when the Lamar Jackson MVP conversation with Josh Allen, who had 20-something interceptions or something like that, came up. But we do have some good players, and for the most part, the top 6 players do kind of align with most of the analytics, Lindsay. So it's an interesting breakdown of where we are right now.
Yeah, and there's a clear number 1. Let's say that. Like in
very,
terms
very
of
clear.
Who should absolutely be, and then it kind of gets a little bit more like pick your poison for a few, but according to our SumerScores, which is how we're going to do this exercise, we're going to look at our own metric here and tell you who the top scorers are at each position. And at the quarterback position, there is one guy, and then there's a little bit of a drop.
Yep. It's Drake May, who is having a certified all-pro level SumerScore season for us right now. He's the only guy who is doing that. He's at the 98th percentile. He's playing extremely well. He's second in EPA per play. I think Drake May has just been the best quarterback, period, in the league. And I know that a lot of people are going to say Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is down at like the 10th in EPA per play. I don't think he's being asked to do quite as much as Drake May is doing. Drake May is also contributing more with his legs. That adds an entire different element to that offense. And I think that's why we've seen the Patriots be so successful this year.
Yeah, Matthew Stafford is also right around 10th in our SumerScore metric also. So that will be one big name who I'm positive is going to make the Pro Bowl this year. The way that the Rams are playing, the way that people have talked about quarterback play. I would be shocked if he didn't. I'll say that. But from a SumerScore standpoint, he's not our recommendation. Who else are we recommending outside of Drake May?
So there's basically 2 classes of players here. First off, you have the players who are achieving a lot despite their team seeing some struggles or them having to do a lot. And they're not necessarily great in the advanced analytics, but they're great in our SumerScore. And so that's our second and third slot, which we have Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. We think they're certified blue chip impact starter season guys right now. And then you go into the next 3 guys who are also in the top 5 of the analytical kind of measures, and it includes some of the guys you would expect just by kind of following the league. Jordan Love, who has had an excellent analytical season despite some absolutely questionable interceptions. He's been able to limit those this year. It's turned into a lot of success for the Green Bay Packers offense. And then the old reliable Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen right now coming off an excellent game. Patrick Mahomes coming off a game that may have buried their playoff odds. Nonetheless, both the standard analytical metrics and SumerScore loves them. I will note, though, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes are not having an incredible year by their standards or by SumerSports standards going back to 2016 at all. We think they're just having a quality starter year. Is that on the borderline of an impact starter year? Yes, but it's not quite there. We haven't seen exactly the level of play that we've seen from them in the past. And I think that's the reason why this season, particularly in the AFC, has felt kind of so off.
The top 4 quarterbacks that you mentioned, Drake May, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, those 4 guys are above the 90th percentile when
Right.
compared to this historical sample size, which goes back to what year again?
Goes back to 2016.
Okay, so we're essentially judging the individual player against all quarterback play since 2016 and telling you that those 4 guys are scoring in the 90th percentile when compared to that entire sample. Outside of that, now we're in the 80th percentile range. So I think that that's what you're talking about in terms of like, there's a little bit of drop off. It gets a little bit muddier. Interestingly, what that does, though, that list is gives us 2 NFC guys and 4 AFC guys. So if we needed to dip to another NFC guy, do we have any guesses as to, where you might want to go with that vote if you wanted to vote 3 and 3?
Yeah, so I think if you were to just do it with an NFC guy, you got to throw in Matthew Stafford. I think they're having an excellent year. Some other guys to consider, though, Sam Darnold has been impactful as a result. He isn't loved by our SumerScore, but he has done a lot. But I do think it's an interesting situation where some of the NFC quarterbacks are not exactly the most high-powered, even though the NFC teams feel like the most high-powered right now.
From a pure SumerScore standpoint, there are 2 names that would come up before either of those 2, and that's Jalen Hurts and Caleb Williams, interestingly enough.
That's a great point. And I think you look at Jalen Hurts and the game on Monday, it signified their season the best, but you think about the reason why they are always in these tight games. It's because typically until yesterday, he doesn't turn the ball over. Going into last night, he only had 2 interceptions, and then he's just such an impact in the running game. And going down into that last drive where he ends up throwing an interception right in front of the goal line, we were able to see that, a big middle of the field throw that registered really well on our play level SumerScores, his ability to kind of extend plays being utilized. And then you look at Caleb, it's kind of a lot in the same. It's exemplified in that Green Bay Packers game. Didn't play well in the first half. Second half, he's able to make difficult plays to bring them back. And so I particularly, Lindsay, am so excited that we're starting to see Caleb pop in an ability to, make plays for himself. And I think that is what SumerScore is picking up. I still think he has a ways to go to get into that Jordan Love or Drake May level zone where not only is he doing the stuff kind of all on his own, but he's able to create within the offense. But I do think that he's starting to build a case for being a quality, real impact starter in this league.
Let me follow up about Jordan Love because I think in the last month or so, he's really turned it on. He's started playing better than he was in the middle of the season. I know there are a lot of people out there who are not sold on him. What is it about his play that you think our SumerScores are picking up that he does do well?
I think the dichotomy in his play is something that people kind of over-index on. So I think you see the really bad interceptions. The problem is like typically when you're throwing a far down the field interception, there's probably a little bit more upside because, it's functionally, particularly on third down, it becomes like a punt. What I think SumerScore is picking up is, number one, we've seen him be more consistent. And I think that showed up kind of with that Christian Watson throw across the middle in the game that basically ended up shutting the game down to a certain degree, where he was not in previous years able to, just play pitch and catch with his wide receivers and allow them to make big plays. And so I think raising that floor a little bit is what SumerScore is picking up, as well as continuing to nail those awesome big time throws that we've seen in the past.
It's also important to note that our SumerScores are picking up O-line play. Right. In front of some of these players. And
excellent
so
point.
there's a way of gauging And actually, I know you and I sometimes will kind of dive into some of the Sumer scores to see what stories are being told. And we can go look and see, like, oh, the offensive linemen all have poor scores. The quarterback has a good score. The running back, in Josh Jacobs' case, has a good score. The story that we're seeing here is that the offensive linemen are getting beat. And that seems to be the judgment call that's being made by this, semi-objective and player agnostic model, but still. So I think that there's some value to looking at things that way. And I think that the story that's coming out is that Jordan Love, in some of the ways where he doesn't necessarily get credit because the environment collapses around him, I guess our Sumer score has decided that in many of those cases, it's not necessarily his fault.
That's an excellent point. The offensive line, when the Packers team was trying to figure that out their identity in the middle of the year, the reason why they needed to find that identity is because they were not getting consistent offensive line play at all, even from their highly paid players. And I think that as the season went on, and they did get healthier at the wide receiver position, which should be noted, they decided to lean into a style of play that de-emphasizes that offensive line to a certain degree. And that's not the way that they played in the past. Typically, this has been a very high rush rate over expected team. And I think we're starting to see the keys finally go into Jordan Love's hands a little bit more. And I think, frankly, that's why they won the game against the Bears.
With regards to Herbert and then also Mahomes, whose name came up, I feel like also them popping in the way that they are at the top of the Sumer score metrics is another good indicator of like these guys that we know are good quarterbacks, even if the counting stats don't necessarily show up in a way that highlights them. They're being impacted by their environments too. And we saw a lot of wide receiver instances this week in both cases, also on the O-line, for crying out loud. Like, let's just take everyone's tackles away and see how that impacts play. Let's move on to the running backs here. And I think that there will be some surprises here, not with regards to the names that come up, but specifically, I think the most surprising thing is going to be where one particular running back is in our Sumer score rankings, because for a large part of the season, people were talking about him as a possible MVP candidate. And now Jonathan Taylor is 5th in our Sumer score rankings for running backs.
The running back position, I think, is the most competitive position for these Pro Bowl slots, and most definitely for the All-Pro slots, and even more so, I think, for the Offensive Player of the Year slots. There's a lot of players that are playing at an extremely high level. And so if you haven't been paying immediate close attention to what is going on with these running backs, you would have still thought Jonathan Taylor is probably the favorite to be the Offensive Player of the Year. Oh, how things changed. The last 3 weeks have really reshuffled these very tightly grouped players. Just to give you a sense of what's going on, 4 of these players are producing at an all-pro level. Christian McCaffrey has changed his game to become one of the greatest receiving running backs and having one of the best seasons we've seen. And then also Javonte Williams is playing well. So there's a lot going on at the running back position right now, Lindsay. There's a ton of juice, and Jonathan Taylor is kind of getting left in the mix as a result of the Colts' downturn.
And by the way, look at that. I mean, when you talk about how tightly contested this race is, look at the percentiles there. I mean, Javonte Williams there in the 6th spot here is in the 96.9 percentile of all running backs since 2016. This is wild. I mean, Christian McCaffrey is practically like the best season that we've seen, 99.5 percentile. So we're getting really, really high-end production out of this position, as you mentioned there. Let's take a look at the NFC AFC breakdown. So Christian, Jameer, Bijan, Kyron, Javonte, those are all NFC backs. We've got one back from the AFC in Jonathan Taylor. If we were looking for a couple other names from the AFC, where would we go? Who would be next step?
I think you'd look at James Cook and you'd look at Devon Achane, who have produced in different ways. James Cook has been kind of the bell cow back, producing explosive plays for the Buffalo Bills, who have, again, leaned on the running game a lot this year, have not seen the absolute best MVP jaw-dropping play from Josh Allen that we've seen in the past. And Devon Achane It's very funny, Lindsay, because we look at Mike McDaniel, and I love Mike McDaniel. I think he's very good. I think he just wins games by the time the end of the year comes. Somehow he pulls a rabbit out of the hat, and he's done it again this year. 2 years ago, it was all about the passing game, right? Then all of a sudden last year, Jonnu Smith becomes a major contributor, a borderline Pro Bowler, and they're playing through the tight ends all the time and these multiple sets. This year, it's become the Devon Achane show. They have limited the amount that Tua can really impact this offense, especially now that Tyreek Hill is not on the field, and they have maximized the amount that Devon Achane can make an impact on the field. We've seen the explosive plays from 2 years ago come back, the ones that we didn't necessarily see last year, and he's been a extreme impact player on that Dolphins team, as all of a sudden they're sitting here at around 500 yet again, and no one really knows how.
The running backs are listed on the official Pro Bowl website where you can vote by yards. Is that the metric that we would want people to consider who the best running backs are?
I see, like, I think when it comes to the running back kind of narrative, it's fine. It's okay. And I think this is really the only place, maybe than other wide receivers to a certain degree, where like if you have a ton of rushing yards, that's probably impacting your team probably pretty well. The problem is just like when you really try to break it down, you want to get into something that exemplifies what they're doing a little bit more. And I know years ago we talked to our friend Sean Clement, who's now at the Jets, about, if you look at EPA per play, some guys who are short yardage or third down backs who are having really good years may pop up. If you went to go look at EPA per play for players with over 100 rushes, guys like Blake Corum, who is a low volume guy, would be at the top. But you also, once you start getting in that 200 carry range, start to get the guys like Jonathan Taylor, start to get Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyron Williams. So I think a mix of almost like carries and EPA per play is the right way to go here. But the running back position, I think, is one where just sheer yards probably tells the narrative of a season and how someone has been used. I'd venture to say all-purpose yards may be a little bit better, because then we get a sense of how Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs have made an impact. So I think if I had to just pick one that would tell a simple story, it would probably be just all-purpose yards.
The one player here who might be hurt in the all-pro voting is actually one that we have not mentioned. He's the next player on our SumerScore list after those AFC guys that if you were looking to fill out the ballot in a balanced way that you might go to, the next name is Josh Jacobs. And he's the one that I think would be hurt the most. And I only bring this up because if you're looking here, it's going to present them in a specific order and you might not scroll down far enough. So we'll bring up this with regards to some other positions where we think that the order is just off a little bit more blatantly. In this case, I think you're not going to go wrong voting for anybody that's in the first two rows, which are 12 running backs. But then 3 running backs into the third row is Josh Jacobs, who's had an outstanding year. And I think probably should be a little bit higher in terms of the consideration. But that's neither here nor there. Let's move to a different variation of the running back position, and that is the fullbacks. And the fact that we vote for 6 fullbacks is wild, because can you name 6 fullbacks? I dare you. I honestly wish that you didn't have a list in front of you, Sam, because I wish I could literally challenge you to name 6 fullbacks, and I bet you couldn't. But you're going to have, more than 6 fullbacks names in front of you. There are 11 that are on the ballot, one of which plays for the Seahawks and has 0 yards or stats on the line.
Yeah.
Have fun with that.
When you break it down to our SumerScore, and I think this is where our SumerScore does a really good job, is we are trying to answer 2 questions. Number 1, how good is this player's season in context? And number 2, how much can we really take stock in that this player's play will continue? This shows up at the fullback position. Right now, we really only have 2 true starter level guys, not like average level, slightly above average guys in terms of play right now. And number 1 is Kyle Juszczyk. So like really the only impact player here is Kyle Juszczyk. Once again, he is probably the only guy who we should really consider for this fullback role. But then you start digging into some other guys. I think Reggie Gilliam has had a really interesting year where They have changed the way they kind of attack that run game. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with Joe Brady. And he really has been an impact blocker for this AFC kind of competing team. And so I do want to give him his flowers. I think if you had to just, you can technically vote for only two people. If you want to be a stickler like Lindsay, the two that I would vote for to ensure that you get an NFC and an AFC representative would be Juszczyk and Gilliam. And then you look at kind of the standard fare down the way. In gold, Robbie Oots, who's the guy from Seattle that you mentioned. I actually really love the year that he's had. If I had to really do this, I'd probably vote for 3. I think he has added an element of personnel diversity, which we've talked about many times on this show, to Klint Kubiak's attack. And they like to trot him out there with very strange personnel formations to really try to get the defensive backfield to lock in and try to open up some stuff in the pass game. He's also a pretty good pass blocker as well. So I if I had to make a vote, Lindsay, I would probably slice off In Gold, slice off Hunter Lepke, slice off Adam Prentice. I would probably be a Juszczyk, Gilliam, Oots voter.
Yeah, and worth pointing out here, Juszczyk is the only guy that really feels like he's having a special season. Like he's in the 96th percentile. He has an 8 according to our SumerSports. Everybody else that we've just mentioned here is in the 70% range. Right. So I'll bang that table a different day about why we take up Pro Bowl spots for fullbacks when nobody uses fullbacks, but that's a conversation for a different day. Like I said, let's move on to the next position and let's take on the wide receivers. We've had some movement here at the top. I'll tell you what, the 2 NFC guys, or at least 2 of the NFC guys there is no doubt they better be on this roster. I have no doubt that they will be on the roster. This is a cut and dry Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, in whatever order you want to vote. Those are the 2 that we absolutely would suggest are must guys. Everybody else, there are a few more names here on that are also having good seasons.
Right. We mentioned the Offensive Player of the Year a couple of times. I think that if you want true value going into the last weeks of the season, and I think this is a place where if you are a bettor, there is true value, because I think this narrative is going to shift time and time again. I went on 2 or 3 weeks ago to friend of the show, Zach Gelb's show, and I kind of got blasted for saying, I don't know if this is going to end up with Jonathan Taylor as the Offensive Player of the Year. I think it's going to end up being Jackson Smith-Njigba. Here I am kind of changing my tune a little bit, because I think Puka and Christian McCaffrey have had such excellent weeks that this is like a razor thin, and not only razor thin, but razor thin and an extremely high level of play in the context of the history that we can look at. So there is a lot of good stuff going on right now, and Puka and Jackson Smith-Njigba are the face of that right now.
Couple of 10s, both in the very, very high 99 percentile range. And then there are some other players who are also having very good seasons, and that is Jamar out of the AFC. Jamar Chase had some quarterback issues, obviously, for a good majority of the season, but has done his job. That's one of the things that our tracking data and computer vision picks up, is the individual route running and contributions. We all know in our brains that Jamar Chase and also Justin Jefferson, who is further down this list, that they're doing their jobs, that they might not be producing. Justin Jefferson's case, the fantasy production isn't what people want it to be. We all know that is related to the quarterback play, but that he hasn't suddenly stopped playing well. I wonder how you treat that as a Pro Bowl voter. I mean, in this case, he might make it anyway because he's such a popular name and everybody knows him. But I also wonder if they go, oh, he's been terrible for my fantasy team, so not now, Justin Jefferson. Like, how do you think that this will play out? And kind of how do you think, I mean, I guess to a degree, the SumerScore is suggesting that he should still make the team. I'm curious about your thoughts about what's likely to happen.
So there's a couple ways we could break this down. Let's look at the statistical and stickiness and what it's saying point of view. Our wide receiver SumerScores are amongst one of the best statistics in football, period, at identifying who is really playing well and who is identifying who will really play well in the future. So I am quite confident that Justin Jefferson is playing at an immensely high level and deserves to be a Pro Bowler. That brings up the question of, man, what is going on at the quarterback position? Man, what is going on at the offensive line, interior offensive line positions with Minnesota? All that being said, even when you start looking at some of our Sumer traits that we have on the back end, Justin Jefferson is having a great season. There's some other names that you may want to consider for the NFC if you do want a little bit of that narrative bump and you want to back it up with a little bit of, Sumer score data or advanced data. I really love what Teterow McMillan has had as a rookie, real impact player who, once again, Bryce Young at the end of the year making stuff difficult for everyone because he started to play well. Big reason is because Teterow McMillan has made yet another step this year in the right direction over what he did just, immediately at the beginning of the season. So I think if you were considering someone to slide in, if you don't like the narrative of a disgruntled player with a quarterback situation that doesn't make sense, you could go Teterow McMillan, but I'm pretty confident that Justin Jefferson is the way to go here.
Yeah, although, as I say that, Justin Jefferson is the fifth NFC ranked player here. So he might not make it because ultimately they're going to be breaking this down by conference. And so if you go Puka and Jackson Smith and Jigba, who are obviously from the NFC and should clearly make it, and then you're trying to decide between George Pickens and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Justin Jefferson, there's no guarantee that it will be Justin Jefferson. As you mentioned, I'm glad that you did. Tet McMillan is the next name. Teteroa, sorry, mom. He's the next name on this list, and that's very, very notable for a wide receiver that was just drafted. I will say, obviously, a lot of NFC names there. The only AFC name on that list was Jamar Chase. So again, if we're looking for other AFC names to plug in here, the next ones that come up on the list are Cortland Sutton, who we have at an 8 and also above 90 percentile. He's at 93 percentile on the season. And then Alec Pierce is the one right under him. Those are some interesting names that I think in any other year might not necessarily be in this conversation, but are this year.
It's a very interesting situation in the AFC right now where we're not seeing this extremely high level of wide receiver play. That being said, and with regards to kind of the discussion of what should stat be, there's really good stats for these players that are just basic stats. Yards per route run, for example, comes up. Guys like Jalen Waddle have played really well. He's doing pretty well in our Sumer score as well. Nico Collins is another guy you may want to consider. But I want to hone in on Alec Pierce because he's having one of the more anomalous seasons that we've seen in a very long time. He has an immensely high yards per route run on a pretty high, I mean, not a true wide receiver one, but a pretty high target share, sitting right around 19.5%. So he's not in that quality 30 to 25% that we really identify with the top receivers in the league, but he does have a pretty high target share. The interesting part of this is his ADOT, which is 19.04. That is crazy high. So basically what we're saying about Alec Pierce is he is running deep down the field. He is getting hit regularly or getting open regularly. And I think that's what is identified by our Sumer score a little bit. And they're throwing it all the time. That's a very, very rare combination to have. Typically, the only guys we've seen who have even gotten close is Christian Watson. Basically, last year was the only other season going back to 2022 that we've seen. Then you got to start thinking of guys that are true deep ball threats that don't have high target share, like Jalen Hyatt or someone else like that, who is not even in remotely the same class across those three statistics, but it's just worth mentioning to give you a sense of how difficult this is and how deep the drop off is. So if we're just talking descriptively, Alec Pierce having a great year, a weird year, maybe go ahead and vote for him.
Yeah, you're going to have to scroll down a little bit to go find him. He's in the 4th row, and as I mentioned, there's 6 in each row. So there are a handful of names that you're going to have to scroll past in order to find Alec Pierce if that's the way that you want to go. All right, let's take a look at the tight ends now and wrap up the pass catchers before we move on to offensive line. Number 1 here, no surprise, Trey McBride having an outstanding season. He's the only tight end that comes in at a 9, which is our all-pro level. We have a handful of players that have scored in the 8s, which is a Pro Bowl caliber season. Who are some of those names?
Tyler Warren, the rookie, who I love to see here. We're talking about Alec Pierce. Tyler Warren's kind of just been the go-to guy for this team, which is a real kudos to him. I think that's why he deserves on a Pro Bowl roster. He probably deserves on an all-pro team as well. I am a little surprised by this one, but I think it makes sense the way that their season has gone. And that's Travis Kelce. You really start looking across the statistics, and Travis Kelce is kind of having a vintage Travis Kelce year. It's just when it hasn't gone right, it's been so visible, including in that Sunday night game where he has the drop that basically breaks the camel's back to end the game. But I think the reason perhaps that we've been able to see Patrick Mahomes really start to rack it up is he has that safety valve, and Travis Kelce has kind of rounded himself into a vintage shape that we haven't necessarily seen the last 2 years. Those two players are stepping up when they need it most, obviously, other than that single play. So it's really interesting. You go back and watch the film, and you start to see those kind of old school Kelce prowling around the line of scrimmage, just trying to pick apart the defense pre-snap. All of a sudden, he has the ball and some room to run. So this was one that, when I hadn't delved deeply into it, I was a little shocked about. But then you delve deep into it, and the eye meets the AI. He's really having a good year, and the analytics, more standard analytics, seem to agree as well. My favorite one of the bunch, AJ Barner. By far.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of reasons for this, but the narrative with AJ Barner is, he's a blocking tight end. He has been utilized in the pass game quite a bit this year. You wouldn't note it if you go look at his yardage total on the Pro Bowl voting, but he has basically been used almost kind of in that Mark Andrews role, but not quite. When I say Mark Andrews, I mean, he's a red zone and short yardage target, and they use him in very core moments that they need to. And the biggest narrative part, which I absolutely love, is he's the tush push guy for the Seahawks. So he has rushing touchdowns and rushing yards and all kinds of cool other stuff as well. So I think he's certified belongs on the Pro Bowl roster this year.
He's been one of the bigger surprises of the season. Like, if we're just going individually and particularly at skill positions, I mean, we knew that there was an opening to a degree for a tight end there in that Seattle offense. The fact that AJ Barner is having the season that he's having, and that it's not just in blocking, that it's also, he has a pretty big pass catching role. I think that that's been a little bit surprising. Theo Johnson, the next name on the list, or also on this list, I think is also a guy that people wouldn't expect to be here. One thing I want to say about AJ Barner, though, is from a game by game standpoint, he feels very, like, the way he's meeting the middle in terms of his averages is very high-low to a degree. We have a lot of 8s and 9s individually from a game standpoint, and then we have 3-4 games. I wonder how much those games where he received 4s in our Sumer scores are because of low volume. Maybe as a tight end, maybe they just didn't use him all of that much, and so his snap count was fairly low, and our metric specifically dings people for not being particularly involved in the game plan.
Right. I think AJ Barner is probably the only player on this list, other than maybe Travis Kelce, on a strange Andy Reid red zone employ, to be able to have a 3 to 4 touchdown game because of the tush push stuff, because of the red zone utilization, because of the heavy personnel stuff. And I think that gives him a massive, massive ceiling as it pertains to his impact on the game at any point in time, as compared to some of these other people. But you get in some of these games that the Seahawks have blown teams out in, and then it's not AJ Barner time. He's just going to be used as a run blocker at that point. And so I think the differences in his utilization won't show up on something like a yardage total. He is a certified run blocker. He is a weapon for the Seahawks in the run blocking game. And I think that's what SumerScore is picking up as well.
Since I mentioned the play count, snap count, that we punish for that, essentially. Like, if a snap count is low, there is going to be very little opportunity for a player to score an 8 or a 9, even if he's outstanding on those handful of plays where he's in the game. The reason that we did that is because there are examples that we can all think of from the last couple of years where they pop in certain metrics. And like a Marvin Mims, I think, is maybe a very good example here of somebody who we think was used very, very appropriately and at the like the perfect time to take advantage of his strengths without exposing his weaknesses in the Broncos offense in years past. But because they put him in that position, he excelled dramatically. So we wanted to put a play count filter in here so that when a coach's decision to not put you on the field for as many snaps as another wide receiver might be, like a wide receiver 1, we didn't want you to be graded the same as that player. So there is, to a degree, some evaluation that the coach is making by not putting you on the field more frequently. And so we incorporated that into our model. And that's what I was referencing at the very beginning when I said those might be, low play count games for him that might be dinging him into a 4 as opposed to his individual play.
I think the best allegory for this decision, which is something I saw on the internet recently, is if you were to go to Google and you're looking for Chinese food, if you see a 5-star review for Chinese food, but only 19 reviews, you're probably not ordering delivery from that place. But if you see a 4.5 or a 4.7, 4.8 review with 6,000 reviews, that place is probably really good. And so at some point, the number of snaps, the number of reviews in this case, gives you a true sense of the player is on the field because he is playing well. Now, maybe there's a floor for that. And that's typically what's indicated by our purple grades or our rotational grades, meaning this is a guy who can get on the field, but maybe he's not all that good. But there should be a separator between the Marvin Mims or the Blake Corum this year, the running back who has a very high EPA per play, and a Kyron Williams who is expected to get 20 carries a game.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain it. We didn't talk about Hunter Henry or Theo Johnson, who are the other tight ends on this list. Theo Johnson is somewhat surprising to me.
Theo Johnson, especially when Jackson Dart has been in the game, has been a go-to receiver. It's been really fun to watch. They've kind of changed the way that offense, and it started with Brian Daboll. Obviously, it's continued from then on. But when Jackson Dart came in the game, he became kind of their go-to, their safety valve, and also kind of a big play guy as well. I know that Stopsky's probably happy about where that goes. He has struggled with drops a little bit, but when you are able to become a go-to guy for a young quarterback, especially on a young team, it can really explain a lot. And with Hunter Henry as well, there's going to be this narrative that you're going to start picking up on as we continue moving through these players. This Patriots team is good. They got good players at a lot of positions. And you look 2 years ago, Hunter Henry was a contributor on this team. So it's really interesting that some of those Patriots players were just kind of latent last year. And then all of a sudden they're kind of back with a reinvigorating coaching staff and Drake May playing really well.
Yep. Environment will work wonders. Let's move to the players who in many cases create that environment for the offense, and that's the offensive line. Let's take a look at the tackles. And I don't know that there are going to be that many surprises on this list. This is kind of the usual suspects.
Pretty much the usual suspects when it comes down to it. We have Penei Sewell at the top, who's having a certified protector of the year game. And Garrett Bowles is the true superstar of this metric. He has been up here the last 2 years. Not a lot of people talk about Garrett Bowles being one of the best left tackles in the league, but he has been. And again, this is another really good metric from us. And I think it's hard to quantify offensive line play sometimes, and particularly in the running game, it's a little tough. But when it comes to the passing game, particularly for tackles, we're able to identify those one-on-one situations with our SumerScore and with our artificial intelligence that's watching the game. So I really think Garrett Bowles is one of the better players in this league. You look at a year where Bo Nix has barely been sacked. A lot of that does come to Bo Nix, but he's getting protected extremely well by that Broncos offensive line, notably by Garrett Bowles. And so you start looking at guys like Andrew Thomas, Laramie Tunsil, Trent Williams, Morgan Moses. It's really exciting for Giants fans that Andrew Thomas is starting to play well. I think there's a real case that this offense could be a league average or better offense once they get really healthy next year. Laramie Tunsil, Trent Williams, guys who have been there for a long time. And again, another Patriot, Morgan Moses.
All right, this is a list, Sam, that is like many other lists. Not surprisingly, this is actually a sidebar conversation that we should have about so many of these players being in the NFC. Like, we're digging for AFC players. I think that there's maybe a theme to the season there. If we were to go looking for someone else to put in from the AFC, where would we look? Because there are a couple of AFC names on this list and a lot of NFC names.
I think there's a couple of teams that you would look closely at. I think you'd continue to look at the Denver Broncos. You'd look in Mike McGlinchey, the right tackle on that team. I think he's had a pretty good year. He is down. He's in the 90th percentile. He's having an impact year. He's just a little further down than some of those other tackles. And then you'd continue to look at a guy who was on our midseason all-pro list, Bernard Raymond, from the Indianapolis Colts. And they've had a little bit of a downturn. He's still performing pretty well. It's just not to the peaks that we had seen prior to. I think you'd go look at those Colts offensive linemen, those Broncos offensive linemen, and you start to figure it out from there.
All right. I think those are good suggestions there. All right. Let's move on to moving inside on the offensive line. Let's take a look at the guards. And the number one player here is by far and away the best guard this season, according to our metric. He's the only 9. It's Joe Thuney from the Chicago Bears. Holla for the Bears here, coming up with good offensive line play and changing pretty much the offense as a result. He's in the 99th percentile. And then we've got 5 other names for you here, all also playing very well.
The thing that I really want to note here is that a lot of these guys, other than really like Quentin Nelson and Chris Lindstrom, have been guys who were, acquired in free agency or considered to be a guy that wasn't necessarily a premium player, and then all of a sudden started playing really good. So you look at Damian Lewis and Joe Thuney. When we talk in the draft season, Lindsay, about being able to go out in the market, sign a big time guard, bring him in, and all of a sudden you can change your fortunes, it is showing here in SumerScore with Joe Thuney and Damian Lewis. And I think that's a real testament to that kind of strategy and approach from the Bears and from the Panthers, with a little bit of quarterback questions going into the season. That's really my main takeaway from this list right here, is that you can kind of go out and get a really good guard, and they're probably going to perform really well. Another guy that I'm just going to note is Michael Onwenu, who has been moved kind of all over the line, was never a premium player. We saw him play really good at guard when he did play there last year. Sure enough, he slots in at guard, able to figure it out. Yet another Patriot on this list. And I think it's really interesting how this guard position has kind of progressed as a result.
Yeah, and if you're looking for another AFC guard, just continue going down the list. There are actually a number. There are about six other guards that are also scoring in the 8 range, including Ezra Cleveland from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's a name that you might want to consider. David Edwards from the Bills, another one. And actually there's a bunch of AFC guys that come in after Chris Lindstrom that are scoring in the 8 range. And one of the reasons that we created the scoring system to be the way that it is to point out the fact that these players realistically are all playing at a similar level, right? Like if you have an 8, there's not that much differentiator. What we've done here in terms of rankings, because these types of postseason awards require you to pick one over the other, is we've looked to filter those 8s by the percentile amongst all guards since 2016, and same for every other position group. But realistically, all of these guys are probably pretty deserving. Hence the 8, which is a Pro Bowl caliber season.
Exactly. So you think of guys like Quinn Miners and Peter Skoronski, who has had a pretty good year at the Titans despite it not being really good. Those guys could easily be in the Pro Bowl. We wouldn't be mad about it at all.
All right, let's go to the centers, and I'll give you one guess which name is at the top of this list. It's one of the players who has a 10 on the season, and that is Creed Humphrey from the Kansas City Chiefs, 99.6 percentile. He's having an outstanding season. The rest of the centers, we jump to there's actually 3 that have 8s on the season, and then we're going to give you a couple of names that have 7s.
I think Creed Humphrey at the center position is probably going to win the Protector of the Year award this year. And I think that's a real testament to how high level his play has been, not only this year, but years prior as well. And so you start looking at some of those other true Pro Bowl players. This hasn't been an excellent year from the centers. It's not quite the same that it has been for the guards. But you start looking at Drew Dahlman and Ryan Nuzell. These are teams that have been able to run the ball pretty effectively. Different breaks for these teams. The Falcons have lost a ton of weird close games and just weird games generally, where the Bears have been able to win those games. But Bijan Robinson, Kyle Monangai, both have pretty good advanced analytics as a result of this offensive line. And then finally, you look at Tyler Linderbaum, who from the Ravens, and here's another guy who has just performed well over and over and over again. And this is just a guy who can contribute. And so I think there is kind of a mix of those Pro Bowl level guys, of two guys who you may not have heard before. Ironically, Drew Dahlman also left the Falcons this year to go to the Bears. So this is another kind of show that you can pick up a real certified Pro Bowl player in free agency. And the Bears were able to do that. But it's also two guys who were drafted by their team and young guys, Tyler Linderbaum and Creed Humphrey.
Let's go over every name on this list, because I think that this is a position that a lot of fans just are unfamiliar with who's playing well at all. And also worth noting, when you go to vote, there's no stats. So they're ordered. I don't even know how they decided how to order these people, because Creed Humphrey is in the third row. So you're going to have to scroll down. You're going to have to look around. You might want to jot down some of these names.
Yeah, the best way to do it is, I found when I was doing this voting, is to search by team, because when you want to get Tanner Bordellini as one of your top 6 guys, you got to filter for the Colts. Something that I've really noticed that is really interesting, Lindsay, and I want to bring it up with respect to our fifth guy on this list, is Jake Andrews from the Texans. And there's been so much discussion this year about how they're not protecting CJ Stroud extremely well. But it's kind of starting to resemble, based on what I've seen, kind of Woody Marks being able to get going from time to time. It's still not an immensely effective run game, but it's been interesting to note is that some of these guys are starting to get into the quality starter range. I think the center position a little depressed this year, so we're not going to say they're making a great impact. We'll say they're solidly good. But you look at guys like Jake Andrews, people have talked about Ed Ingram from time to time. Maybe we got to start looking a little closer at CJ Stroud and his kind of propensity to take sacks, his propensity to take pressures, because we are seeing guys like Jake Andrews, who is probably one of the top 6 centers or around that rate in is definitely a quality starter on the year.
So interesting. And he is notably, if you don't filter by team, the last center on the entire list. So I wonder if he has no chance to make it just based on that. I mean, this is, it's just a structural thing, but when you're the last name on the ballot and every other position group has seemingly been categorized by best to worst, at least by an individual stat metric, this could be a tough one. Definitely. So, and as noted before, I mean, center and guard, I think, are in particular, those are the hardest positions for fans, even well-meaning fans who actually want to know. It's so hard to evaluate interior offensive line play. But I do really like the point that you've made, and filing away for a roster building season once it's free agency and the draft, that you can get some of these guys in the draft, because there are certainly some teams that need to address their interior offensive line. And that's good to know that that's something that you can do in free agency. Tackle, for instance, probably not a position that you're going to find become available in that manner.
Definitely. And I think it's funny that we're highlighting all the weird instances of the centers and having to scroll all the way down, because we're about to move into the position defensive ends, where who is a defensive end? Who is an outside linebacker? We may never know, but we broke it down for you here.
Yeah, so I got an answer, by the way, from the NFL. This is one of the things that I reached out to them about, just to try and figure out who decides, it doesn't really matter. They are where they are, but just out of curiosity. and was told that the teams designate a certain number of players as starters. This also has to do with, for instance, we'll get to it a little bit later on, but there are some positions, there are some guys who are playing great that aren't on the ballot that we actually would tell you to vote for if they were on the ballot. All of this stems from the teams designating who is a starter. And those are the only names that are on the ballot. All players that are listed as starters are eligible for fan voting. All players on the roster are eligible for the coach and player ballots. And the teams also decide what position players are listed at. So if you are familiar with somebody as an edge rusher, but they're listed at outside linebacker, that's because the team specifically designated them in that way. Another question, just since we're checking this box right now, that I think will come up is there are some players who are on IR or have been on IR and are on the ballot. Some are on the ballot, some are not on the ballot. Players on IR automatically removed from the ballot, I was told, unless teams specifically reach out requesting to add them back if they had been active for a minimum of 6 games this season. And then players that are designated to return that actually return are automatically added back into the Pro Bowl balloting. So let's take a look at these edge rushers, at least the ones that are listed at edge rusher for your voting pleasure. And number 1 is one who, man, he had a game this week and has, obviously, since he's at the top of the list all season long.
This list is kind of a who's who of who you should probably be considering for Defensive Player of the Year.
True.
Will Anderson, if I had a vote, would be my vote right now. I am floored by what he has done. And there's a lot of competition, as you can see right here. There's a lot of Player of the Year type guys. I think the edge rushing position is in a similar spot as the running back position, where there's just guys who are playing at an extremely high level right now. Will Anderson, I think, is certifiably at the top. Is he separated by 1/10 of a point, 1/10 of a percentile? Yes, he is. So it's not that crazy. But I just absolutely love what he's doing, both in the run game and in the pass game. And so those guys that you want to start considering a little bit more, Aiden Hutchinson, the heart of a defense that has kind of shocked everyone with its ability to play well. Micah Parsons getting a lot of pressures, really, made his mark. And as we continue going into these more pressure-filled games, I think Micah Parsons is going to make a huge difference for folks. And then Myles Garrett really on the precipice, literally 98.99 percentile. If he has 2 sacks next week, he's going to be at the Player of the Year caliber, the 99th percentile that we want to see and what we typically see from Player of the Year caliber players. Myles Garrett's probably another one you want to consider for that vote as well.
So the players at the defensive end position are listed by sacks on the official ballot. Is that how you would list him?
That is a really tough one, because when you get a lot of sacks, you are impacting a game. You are killing EPA. But I think people really discount how much a pressure impacts a quarterback as well. Now, pressures are not an official NFL stat. You have to go to a charting service. We give it to you on Sumer Brains for free, so you can go check that out there. But if I had it my way, I think, and I had to pick one stat, I'd pick pressure rate. I think that would be the one that I would want to do. You already have a little limitation, as you outlined, Lindsay, of the guys getting nominated and so forth and so on. So you are limiting it to a certain degree. You get those starters in there and you figure out which ones have the highest pressure rate. That's what I'd really love to see.
I mean, if they are filtered, I agree with you, by the way. I always say pressures are the process, sacks are the result. And I kind of look at that similar to offense versus defense, for fantasy. Like, that the offense is going to dictate how well the defense does. That's why you don't play the best defense every week in fantasy. You play the defense that's playing the worst offense, if possible. That's how you're going to generate fantasy points. You are sort of like, the actual outcome of the play has a lot to do with what the offensive player does. Whether the quarterback flushes out of the pocket and runs away, you've still impacted the play negatively, possibly, for the offense, which is really all that we can ask of you, right? Like, it's on them to decide how to respond to that. So I agree with you about the pressures versus sacks there. But I do think it's worth noting in this particular case that all of the names that we have on this list are in the first two rows of the options that you're going to vote for on your ballot. So at least you're not going to have to scroll around. This is probably one of the least egregious ones in that sense. All right, let's move to the defensive tackles and try and figure out who we're going to vote for on the inside.
So this is one where you're not going to have any of those player of the year type players, but there are some quality Pro Bowl level guys. I think Jeffrey Simmons has been the best defensive tackle in the league this year. I think he's a certified lock to make this list. You might have to do a little scrolling because if you were watching Sunday Night Football, they were talking about how Chris Jones hasn't been as impactful and hasn't been doing all this stuff. He doesn't have the sack total. He's been a monster. He's been causing all kind of ruckus for defenses. He just hadn't been able to finish it off for one reason or the other. And you saw how that came to fruition in that game where the defensive line all of a sudden pinned their ears back. And oh my God, CJ Stroud was running for his life from Chris Jones. Chris Jones was winning virtually every play. He's had an excellent year as well. You go to Quinnen Williams, very similar story. May have to scroll down a little bit, but we've seen in recent weeks how some of those pressures become sacks and how some of those run stuffs start to make a real difference. He's another one of those all-pro level performers now that he's in a Cowboys uniform. He's another guy that I consider a lock. You start getting into those Pro Bowl side players. I really love what Kobe Turner's done. Vita Vea, a constant presence on that Tampa Bay defense. Cameron Hayward, an even more consistent presence, probably more consistent than anyone in NFL history at this point at the defensive tackle position. So a lot of good quality Pro Bowl level performers. We're not seeing quite the high-end level. Jeffrey Simmons could get there by the end of the year, but when it really comes down to it, this is a really good core group.
And it's really convenient how this has come together because we have 3 from the NFC and 3 from the AFC. So we don't even have to look past this list. Let's go ahead and take a look at the outside linebackers here. And we've got a couple of Rams at the top of the list.
Yeah, this is where it starts to get pretty interesting because you just have 4 guys from the same team. And you really start to consider Highsmith as well, who has had a pretty good season. He's a quality starter. He has a 7 for us. He's in the 84th percentile. But this is where that kind of unique, I am designating this guy as an outside backer, becomes quite interesting to consider. Some guys who are also kind of down in those quality starter ranges is the 2 guys from the Denver Broncos as well, who are kind of on the borderline. That's Nick Medino and Jonathan Cooper. But when it really comes down to it, Byron Young, Jared Verse, Nick Herbig, who they just add yet another guy, in addition to Highsmith, across from TJ Watt. It's absolutely crazy how they've been able to do that. TJ Watt, you get, the AFC is just going to be Steelers party and the NFC is going to be Los Angeles party, Lindsay.
Wild. It is interesting, though. Do you think that the teams designate these players in such a way that they can get on that they can get these awards? Because you could say edge, outside linebacker. What's the difference? The edge list is much harder to make. So if you are designated as an outside linebacker, you have a much better shot at making the Pro Bowl.
It's a really good point. If you were to ask me to break this down, an outside backer has to cover some, and maybe you pick a point if you really wanted to make it super objective. You pick a percentile or a percentage in which that player needs to drop back, and you kind of drop a pin there. Or maybe you look at whether he has his hand in the dirt quite a bit, 3-point stance or something like that. I don't necessarily know. But it also brings up a good point just about kind of cap management as well, Lindsay, because a lot of these guys do have Pro Bowl incentives in their contracts. We're talking with some of our CapEx experts here. Typically, the dollar amount that you would expect for an incentive would be about $250,000. So we're not talking about anything absolutely backbreaking, but a nice little incentive. Yeah, 100%. And so they typically, the way that cap folks look at this is they look at it as, if I I don't think anyone's going to try to circumvent the cap anytime soon by like changing whether this player makes the Pro Bowl or doesn't. Maybe it could be a sign of goodwill. What I was told by our cap experts is if you have to pay that 250 grand, that means that they're almost certainly one of the best players in the league, and you're probably underpaying them anyway. So just shoot them the 250 grand and forget about it, and be happy that they played so well this year.
That's a great point. What about the inside linebackers?
So this is a really interesting group, and you kind of consider what is going on here. And there's a wide array of inside linebackers here. You got two guys who I think a lot of people think are really, really good at the top. You got Zach Bond, you got Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell, real breakout guy. Maybe, you start considering him, given that he does have a pretty good sack total. He's involved in the coverage game. Maybe just start considering him for a defensive player of the year. Don't think he has enough to break what those defensive ends and edge rushers have. But there's a kind of a two-tier group right there. Then you start getting into some other guys, some more interesting guys you may not have heard of. Carson Schlesinger, the rookie, excellent draft pick from the Cleveland Browns. Cedric Gray has been a machine for the Titans, a real run stuff guy behind Jeffrey Simmons, who has played pretty well, maybe an arrow up in future years for the Titans behind those two guys on the defense. And then two veterans, Jordan Brooks, Caden Ellis. So a really interesting group here. I think, Lindsay, this is going to be one where you're going to have to do some scrolling around, because if tackles do not necessarily say everything that needs to be said.
And that's how they're listed, by tackles.
Exactly. So you do some scrolling around, look on that second row, look on that third row, and it may get to start. It may start to get a little bit interesting for you as you're doing your voting.
What is the stat? Is there a stat that you should measure linebacker play if you are casually glancing at stats to decide who should get your vote?
As an ex-linebacker, I don't really have a great answer for this, because you look at a guy like Zach Bond, a lot of the things that he's doing great is in coverage. So if he's taking away the entire middle of the field, as he typically will do, that's not going to show up on a stat sheet. So I think our Sumer scores are pretty good. The linebacker position just does not have super sticky stats, including our Sumer score. So it's tough to evaluate these guys, but something like Sumer score would be the way that I would really want to go, so that I can indicate which players are playing extremely well in coverage.
So essentially what you're saying is people should just take a look at the graphic that we just put up on the screen and vote accordingly.
Exactly. That is exactly what I would do, Lindsay.
Okay, those are the inside linebackers. Now let's move into the secondary here and take a look at the cornerbacks.
Right. So I really love the guy at the top of this list, Keyshawn Nixon from Green Bay. He's having a all-pro level season. He's played extremely well. And he is part of that Green Bay Packers defense, which has risen from a team that was boom or bust last year, and they were boom substantially more than they were bust. But when it came down to it, their defense just wasn't good enough, to a team that has one of the best defenses in this league. And I think Keyshawn Nixon is a major reason for that. You look at Deommodore Lenoir. This is a guy who has consistently been on our list all throughout the season, playing well, a cornerstone of that 49ers defense, which has not performed well in the metrics, but he's kind of holding it together. And then you get into some really interesting stories that I've really been following. Carlton Davis, a guy who was obtained from the Lions last year. I think the Lions could really use him right now, given their depth at the cornerback position. Yet another Patriots guy who was playing extremely well. Kamari Laster had one of the best plays I think I've ever seen against the Chiefs, where he lays out in the end zone, gets one hand on the ball, prevents a touchdown on a beautiful Patrick Mahomes throw. He has been performing extremely well. He is an absolute joy to watch on that Texans defense. You may not know his name. You may only know Derek Stingley. Be sure to watch Kamari Laster when it comes to watching the Texans defense. Cooper DeJean, 2 for 2 when it comes to Sumer scores. He's excellent. Had a good game on Monday as well. And then Jack Jones is someone who people I don't think will know. And I think when you start to see all these Miami victories, you don't really understand what's going on. The defense is starting to round into shape, and Anthony Weaver's complex scheme has really found a home for Jack Jones. he is performing extremely well across analytical metrics. And so I think when you start looking at things like targets per snap or yards given up per coverage snap, that aligns with what we're seeing from our Sumer scores as well. He's having an excellent year, certified Pro Bowl year.
He had a couple of really good weeks in weeks 10 and 11 in particular that boosted his score with a 9 and 8 there. There is a name that is not on this list that was on our quarter pole all pro list at a very high level. I want to say Quentin Lake had a 10 at that point in the season. The nickel corner for the Rams, who is now on IR, certainly has 6 games under his belt, so could be on this ballot, but is not on the ballot. You cannot vote for Quentin Lake. And so I don't know if that's because he's on IR and the Rams didn't ask to put him on. I don't know if it's because the Rams didn't designate him as a starter. But Quentin Lake is not somebody that is eligible to be voted for. Do you think that there's any chance that he would get votes from the coaches and players and find a way in anyway? Because he's somebody that our Sumer score says should absolutely get that nod.
I think it's very possible. And I think you think about these kind of nickel back, nickel corner, nickel safety guys who haven't really shown up on this list. I think Quentin Lake is the first one you got to consider. And then I couldn't find Nick Emenwari anywhere on this list. He's not necessarily a certified breakout guy in terms of Sumer scores. He's used in a lot of different ways, and he's struggled at times, particularly in coverage, as we like to look at it from Sumer score. But he's going to be a guy who gets a lot of nods from players and coaches, just from the standpoint that I think a lot of coaches wish they would have drafted him at this point. You can't vote for him. So I think both Lake and Emenwari are in an interesting position where they're not going to get any fan votes at all just because of the way it works out.
This is an interesting one in that we have 3 from the NFC and 3 from the AFC. So if you just want to vote for all of these guys, then you're covering both conferences. Let's take a look at the next position group, and that is the last position group also. Although I guess we could do special teams. We didn't set out to do special teams. Let's talk about the safeties.
The safeties are uniquely split up. You have the free safeties, and then you have the strong safeties. I'm not quite sure what the difference is, but we're going to lay out for you who you should vote for. So let's start out with the free safeties. You look at some of these guys. Evan Williams has played excellently. Again, another Packers guy on this defense. And I think that's a kind of thing to watch, Lindsay, as we move into the playoffs, is there's starting to become a lot of Packers guys on this list. You look at Jalen Ramsey. We had him graded early in the season as a corner from our Sumer scouts. All of a sudden, now he's a safety for this team, and he's performed pretty well. Like, he's just having a great year when it really comes down to it. And I think that move to safety has kind of helped him a little bit, and he's been able to kind of really lock in there in recent weeks. And you see some of these other guys, a lot of young guys on this list, Lindsay, when it comes to free safeties. Evan Williams, Kalen Bullock, Jalen Hawkins, Cam Bynum, Kobe Bryant, names that people may not know, but they have been contributing really highly to their teams.
I think that it's fair to say that there are a handful of names on this list that people are not going to know. If we pull up the free safety voting list, I'm wondering if there are some names that are going to, let's see, are there any big names that just are not having?
I think the biggest name that I saw that we didn't necessarily have on here, but is kind of right on the cusp of a Pro Bowl level Sumer score. He's in the 89th percentile. Is Kevin Byard. Maybe people have kind of caught up with him. He is having a very good year. And I think he's at the top of the list because he has a lot of interceptions.
6
six
interceptions.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who at this free safety position could slot in. There's a real question of like what that means for his career and like whether all of a sudden he becomes a Hall of Fame level guy because he has like several All-Pro and Pro Bowl nods. He kind of went dormant in a Birds uniform for a little while, and now he's back up playing well. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But I think Kevin Byard's probably a guy who will sneak in because he's at the top of that free safety list.
All right, let's take a look at the strong safeties here and close out the defense.
Yeah, here's where you're starting to get in those names that you probably know. Guys like Xavier McKinney from Green Bay. Guys like Kyle Hamilton. from the Baltimore Ravens. Talanoa Hufanga, who we love in terms of SumerScore. We think he's having an excellent year. We think he's having a real groundbreaking 99th percentile year. And then Cameron Curl, another guy from this Rams team. I think my main takeaway from this, Lindsay, is that, some of these players, it speaks a narrative that maybe it's just the Rams, the Packers, and the Patriots this year. Maybe that's the way it's going to go out, because we've been talking about a lot of those guys, Rams, Packers, Patriots, over and over and over again. I think that's what this exercise kind of taught me. Down year from this, quote, strong safety group. You look at guys like Jeremy Chin, Brian Branch, they're kind of deeper into that quality starter level. That being said, they are quality starters. And according to this, disambiguation of the safety position, they're one of the top 6 in the league.
Yeah, the one point that we want to absolutely bang the table for here is one that you already did, and that is vote for Hufanga.
Right. Yeah. If you have one vote at this strong safety position, I would not recommend doing that, because Kyle Hamilton's been playing really well, as has Cam Curl. But if you had one vote, give it to Hufanga.
Yes. Or at least please include him and then go wherever you want with the rest of your votes. But please, please, please don't look away from that. I wonder, and I know that you mentioned that, a lot of Rams, a lot of Packers, and that was one of my takeaways here is I'm seeing a lot of names from specific teams. The Packers, very interesting that they have one of the, a defensive player of the year candidate up front in Parsons, and they've got a defensive candidate. But Keyshawn Nixon, who's playing, is our highest scoring corner, and they've got that on the back end. That type of combination is so interesting. I think people know both of those names. I think we said a lot of names from the Rams that are not household names. And I think that was my takeaway when we did this exercise, when we were just talking about people that we would vote for an all-pro team earlier in the season that were leading in some of those categories, was that the names on the Rams that people know outside of Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford didn't make the cut. Kyron Williams did make the cut this time, but didn't last time that we were talking about this. It's a lot of the names that, and I think that this exercise is so helpful for me too, because now I feel like I'm even more sold on the Rams as a team to watch for the playoffs, because not only are they winning, not only are they doing what we're seeing on the field, but then you look at the way that individual players are scoring, knowing the way that we evaluate their play, saying that guy is actually balling out. That guy's actually balling out. That guy is playing so well. You don't know who any of these players are. It's not just that the team itself is winning games. There's a reason they're winning games. And it feels like I'm a big process over results person, that the process there points to this is the team to watch in the postseason to me.
Right. And I like that you mentioned process versus results, because we try to communicate these things in terms of SumerScore, in terms of these analytics, in a language that football people have communicated them over the years. And typically the way that these scouting systems have been set up, in a very similar way that we communicate them, blue chip, green starter, so forth and so on, is that if you think that you have a lot of blue chip players, that probably indicates that you're going to have a really good team, which doesn't sound shocking, but that's what you're trying to build your roster towards. And each team and each scouting service has, its own little anecdotes of, if you have X amount of blue players, you end up making X round of the playoffs. As an analytically based company, you want to stay away from those heuristics. You want to build database stuff. Yep. But let's say we are working with these heuristics, and we've mentioned a lot of blue chip Pro Bowl players that are top 6 at their position. There's a lot of Rams who are currently the favorite, plus 390 on FanDuel for the Super Bowl, but the Packers are plus 800. That's third best odds. The Patriots are below the Buffalo Bills, so there's value on them for the AFC. They're plus 1,000 for the Super Bowl. You go down all the way down to the Denver Broncos, who, maybe we didn't talk about Bo Nix, and maybe we didn't talk about, we mentioned some of the wide receivers as maybe being there, but you think Mike McGlinchey as a blue chip grade. You think Garrett Bowles could potentially be the protector of the year. You have Hufanga, and you think about the names that didn't necessarily have a certified blue chip grade this year, but it really comes down to it. And Surtain, the pass rushers, the linebackers, maybe that's a team that has a little bit more juice just because the quality of their team. They're all the way down there at plus 1,000 as well. So maybe there's a lot of juice in those New England Patriots and the Broncos over the Bills, who notably, I don't think we named one Bill on this list.
I'm going through the list right now to see, because that was the first thing I thought of when you said that. Like, from an odds to make the Super Bowl, I don't think we named a single player.
Josh Allen, of course, but you kind of just count him into the consideration. Reggie Gilliam, can I interest you in a fullback, Lindsay, as a member of this list?
Absolutely not. Come on, don't insult me. Let's see. Unless they want to start, no. And if they did start playing him more frequently, my guess is that he would fall off this list. Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, Josh Allen and Reggie Gilliam are the only Bills that made the top 6 at any position.
Well, yeah, and I think you watched that Sunday game, and of course it was raining, and of course Joe Burrow came back, but for the grand majority of that game, if Josh Allen doesn't turn into Superman, that game might start getting out of hand pretty quickly. And obviously you get a 2 pretty fluky picks, if I can say so myself. An excellent play by Christian Benford where right place, right time, and then a tip ball in the snow. Maybe that ends up going the Bengals' way, but I do think there's probably a little bit of overvalue. So if you really are going through your Pro Bowl ballot and locking in some of these guys that we're seeing from these other AFC teams, I think they're probably undervalued just from a quote narrative perspective right now. Especially
also,
Drake May. Drake May's going to win the MVP. Like, wow, they're the best team, and they have
will?
the MVP.
Do you think he will? I mean, like, so our metrics are saying, like, absolutely consider this, but do you think that he can win MVP in his second year? That enough people will vote for him? I actually think that it's going to be so interesting, because I really think from a narrative standpoint, we all know that a lot of these awards are narrative driven. Like, you need somebody who is driving a team to, a lot of success. And then I think people are going to give it to Stafford, I guess, is where I'm going with all of this. Like, if you have Stafford or Drake May, and both of those teams, I know what are you making your face because our SumerSports have a clear favorite?
Yeah, I mean, like, you look at any analytical metric and it's Drake May.
Right.
And so
how many people do you think will look at analytical metrics, though, that vote? They're not even broadcast on the broadcast. I mean, if you literally watch every single game in detail, you will not hear any of these stats. None. Yeah, we won't talk about it.
And to be clear, like, the market prices in narrative, and Matthew Stafford's minus 160 to win the MVP right now, and Drake May is plus 200. So you do have a definite standpoint there, Lindsay. The narrative is in Stafford's favor.
And he checks let's be clear here. We're not saying Matthew Stafford's not playing well. Like, in no way, shape, or form. He's playing great. He's maybe having the best season of his career. There's a lot going on there that is very, very good. And if you take Matthew Stafford off that team, what's happening to that team is not happening to that team anymore, at least to the degree that it is.
I think it's interesting too, because this MVP race, and I do want to caveat very slightly that we do not have anyone who we truly believe is certified MVP. Lamar Jackson last year, or Josh Allen last year.
There were 2 last year. Lamar and Josh would have wiped the floor with this year's crop.
Exactly. And that's even in our SumerSports. Like, we think Drake May is playing at an all-pro level. One of the top 2 guys in the league. And typically what we see from that, but we're not seeing, bang, certified MVP from him. So just to kind of caveat a little bit, that being said, I think this could literally come down to and it's like this for Offensive Player of the Year as well. I think less so, especially if Myles Garrett sets the sack record, and he'll end up being in that 10 class as well that we would expect. I think it'll probably go to Myles Garrett as a result. So I think that's a little less close. But the MVP in particular, if I'm trying to differentiate May from Stafford, and I don't want to necessarily use analytics, May hasn't had the Panthers game. May hasn't had the Seahawks game that Matthew Stafford has, where it's probably on his performance and his performance alone why they lost. So
did May play any defenses that are as good as the Seahawks?
That's a very excellent question. No, they have not. As many people have pointed out on Twitter. But typically, I will say, from a data perspective, you go over the course of 18 games, that defensive difference does kind of it doesn't make as big of a difference as you would think in terms of like quarterback expected points added per play explained or something like that. It really does kind of come down to the offense and how it is run. And defenses in particular across the league are a little compressed more than offenses are. And so I think when you look at the expected points added per play, really success that the Patriots are having, a major part of that is Drake May. But we also named a lot of good guys. I think Will Campbell, we mentioned Morgan Moses, we mentioned Micah Nwonu. He does have a lot of help as well. But then again, so does Stafford. You got Puka, the offensive player of the year, potentially. You got Kevin Dotson. You got Kyron Williams, who showed up on this list. So this is going to be a down to the wire MVP race, to say the least.
We will go ahead and post all of the graphics that have all of the names at every position at our social media handles, so that if you want to refer back to any of this when you are casting your ballot, you'll have some cheat sheets in front of you. So that's at SumerSports on Instagram and Twitter, all the different social media platforms. You can find that there. SumerSports.com also has lots of filterable data that you can use to make your Pro Bowl decisions, or perhaps fantasy decisions. For those of you who made the playoffs, congratulations. They start this week in most leagues. Sam notably did make the playoffs in our SumerSports league. I did not. This was my league, Sam, that, well, there were a few leagues that didn't go well, but this is the one. I made the playoffs in 9 leagues, and I did not make the playoffs in 5.
It happens to all of us. I just want to say, if you were a devoted listener to the Sumer Sports Show and we were talking about fantasy, I did say that I was going to try to get Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round of every draft that I possibly could, if possible. I have Jahmyr Gibbs. And then Lindsay, you set us up with a little weird league format.
No. I ruined it.
I kind of exploited it a little bit because we got 4 flex positions, and I knew that wide receivers score a lot more points than everybody else when it really comes down to it. So in those middle rounds, I started grabbing guys like Emeka Egbuka, George Pickens, who weren't necessarily big time guys, So if I got to toot my horn a little bit, I kind of played this one analytically right. Now, in some of my other leagues, did I do that? No, I'm getting blasted. But we're not going to talk about that right now.
Yeah, I blew this league in a couple of ways. One, I made it 18 rounds, not taking into account that it was a 14-team league. And so the last 2 rounds were literally like, who are these guys for a lot of the people in the league? And also I made it for flex spots instead of kicker and defense. So when you have that many players getting drafted, that means that no one is available on the waiver wire. And so there was no opportunity to pivot. If you had Joe Mixon and were planning on him coming back from IR, that was just a wasted spot. Brandon Ayuk sitting on IR for the entire season. I mean, these are guys. Stopsky, did you have both of these guys? Good God, that's bad luck. I actually have both of those guys in a different league. So I feel your pain. But
I got very lucky in that I saw one tush push from AJ Barner, and I picked him up off the waiver wire. And I was also in a Rondé Gadsden drafter.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
So mid-season, he hadn't yet, left my roster because the league was so deep. And then all of a sudden he started getting an absolute ton of points.
All right. So. Well, I have a WWE style belt that's going to go to the winner of this league.
Oh my God, I forgot, Lindsay. I have to win now.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever take it off. I'm gonna legitimately be like the forever champ. I'm gonna be like Mercedes Moné.
If you win our league, I will ship it to you overnight so that you can appear on the next podcast and gloat and
discount double check your guy.
All of my guy. That was when he was my guy. And then he became not my guy. All right, that's going to do it for us on the Sumer Sports Show today. Thanks for going through all of these different position groups with us. We'll be back again next week with more.